Hello, I'm Jason with CodeLearner.com. Here we're going to work on lesson number 8, which is really taking a closer look at our very simple program that we've created recently in lesson 7. The only difference is I have slightly different text here. I've already compiled and run this program, and you can see the output here at the bottom. I want to go down here and really point out a few things. I've tried to kind of mention them in passing, but really need to make sure you understand here. For every Java program, it starts with a class definition. And the class definition, in this case lesson 8, is the same as the name of your program, which is lesson8.java. So we've kind of discussed this before. It's something that you're just going to have to get used to because it's always true of all Java programs. And it's kind of evidence there to show you since every Java file name has to have a class of the same name inside the file, every single Java program really is object-oriented, even at a basic level like this. We'll talk a whole lot more about object-oriented programming later in the class. Also notice that after we have public class lesson 8, so that's the class definition, there's an opening curly brace, and you can see the matching curly brace Eclipse is highlighting for you. That's very helpful actually. So you can see the opening and the closing curly brace. So everything between these two curly braces defines what is the class called lesson 8. So in Java, you're going to see this over and over, and for anyone out there who's been programming in C or C++, it's all the same in C as well. Everything, your blocks of code are going to be opened with curly braces and closed with curly braces. All right? Now inside here you see that we have the main method. The main method is where the program begins executing. So when we start the program, it comes to the main method, which is inside this parent class, which is the name of the Java file. And it basically begins executing here. And you can see the line that we've used to put this text out is called system.out.println. You can think of it as print line there. And you can see we open the parentheses and we have in quotations the text that we want to print. So there's several things I want to talk about here. First, let's talk about the easiest things. The text that you want to print is always going to be enclosed in quotation marks, right? The other thing I want to mention is that almost every line of code in Java is going to terminate with a semicolon at the end. Now, obviously everything doesn't. The class definition doesn't have a semicolon. The method, the main method, doesn't have a semicolon like right there, for instance. But almost every other line will. So when you define variables, when we do other types of things, any kind of addition or subtraction of numbers, when we have any kind of computations, we're always going to terminate it with a semicolon. If you forget the semicolon, then Eclipse is going to try to tell you that you've forgotten it by underlining it and giving you a little squiggly, almost like a word processor. So it's trying to give you that visual cue that it's there. Now notice that the text that we're sending to the output is inside of parentheses. So you can kind of think of the text here that we want to output being passed to the print line method through these parentheses. So you can kind of think of everything inside this parentheses as kind of like a football. You're passing the football off to the print line, basically the method there that's going to output that text to the screen. Now, the other part I want to talk about is the system.out part. This gets a little complicated so early in the course, so we're going to keep it simple. But basically, everything's object-oriented in Java. So the system refers to your system, your computer system. The .out basically refers to outputting text to the console. So when you see something like this down here at the bottom, it says console. That means text outputted in a very basic way to the screen. You notice all our programs so far, they've just output simple text, just to the console down here, and also when we're doing it on the command line, like when we were putting our programs here, the text just kind of popped up on this black screen here. In real-world applications, real Java programs, you probably are going to have a GUI interface, a graphical interface, and there are many other ways to output text in Java to the screen, especially when you're dealing with a GUI, like a window interface. But you have to crawl before you can walk, and so what we're going to use is the system.out.println method there to output text to the screen, in the beginning. And so after we get comfortable with things, we get way down in the course and we start learning about graphical interfaces, then we'll learn other ways to output text. So just kind of keep that in mind. This is kind of a stepping stone. Eventually you'll get to graphical programs much later on. All right, so in general, this idea of a word, dot, another word, dot, another word is going to be very common in Java methods and functions. You're basically accessing the system, accessing the output stream, accessing a part of that which is going to send the text to the output. And so this dot structure is kind of almost like a hierarchy there. The top level, mid level, and sort of the bottom level. And so you can kind of think of it as a hierarchy. Now the other thing I want to talk about is up above where we have public static void main. So this is the main method. We talked about that before. The program is going to begin executing here. Now inside or right after the main method you see an open parentheses and a closing parentheses, and you also notice that there is an opening curly brace and the corresponding closing curly braces right here. So the main method, the entire body of our program really has to be contained within these two curly braces. So everything you want to do really needs to be inside of there. So when we write longer and longer programs, this is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as we go and develop longer programs. All right, now inside of these parentheses, this is a main method, and we said you can almost think of these parentheses as a sort of a football play where I'm passing something to the main method. So here I have string and args. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but basically the string here with the bracket is a definition of a string variable. So a string in programming is just text. It's this right here. Computers are pretty neat. This is just a text string. So what this is saying is that I'm going to execute the main method, and I'm going to be able to accept a string and pass it to the main method when I start the program execution. Now, it's sort of something that isn't done too often, but there are some programs out there when you start the program you might want to pass it some arguments that it can then use to begin computing. But here in the beginning, we're really not going to actually pass it any argument. So all we're doing here is it's a standard thing in all Java programs. You want to give it the definition that you can pass it a string argument, but we're not using it, we're not doing anything with it, just kind of get used to seeing it there. But it's giving you that provision. If I wanted to start the main method and pass it a variable or pass it a string, I can do that through this here. All right. Now the words before the main method are, again, a little bit beyond the scope of where we're at right now. The void just means that the main method's not going to return a number. If you remember back, or return any value. If you remember back, we did an example where I showed you that you could create, it was back in the earlier days, it was just kind of general talking, that you could have a method, you could define a method that would accept two numbers and average them, and it would return the result. Well, methods in generally return results back to whoever's calling them. In this case, the main method doesn't return anything because it's the main program. Who's it going to return it to? So there's nobody that the main method is going to return anything meaningful to, so we declare it as void. That just means the main method is not returning anything. Public and static have to do with the object-oriented nature of Java. They're a little bit beyond the scope of where we're at right now, but public essentially means that this main method can be called from outside of this public class here. See, main method's a very special case. It's the main executive of this program, and so when we first execute it, we need to be able to execute the main method from outside of this public class because we're just starting the program. So we need to be able to jump inside of here and execute it. And so public is giving it that the ability to go ahead and start up like that from outside of the public class. A lot of what I've said here is not going to make sense so early in a programming course, but I wanted to at least give you the opportunity to be exposed to it. If you don't understand every single word that I've said, don't worry about it. We're going to get into a lot more detail, especially the stuff with public static void. We're going to get into a lot more examples when I'll show you exactly what these words mean. And you know, things like system.out.println are going to get a lot more intuitive for you as we work a lot more programs as well. Final thing I want to talk about before we close this lesson is that Java is case sensitive, and that is very important for you to remember, because if you don't remember that, then you're going to get frustrated when you start typing programs in. Let me give you a quick example. If I have a variable, and we haven't even talked about variables yet, but if I create a variable called JSON, okay, that is the totally different thing than the variable called JSON. When I have a capital J versus a lowercase j, these are two different things. right? So anytime you declare a variable, or anytime you see one of my programs, like in one of my examples, and I'm declaring it a certain way, you have to type everything exactly in. And if you don't type it in exactly the right way with the wrong case, then Java's not going to know what it is. It's going to give you an error. So when you're typing programs, if you hit errors, just make sure you're spelling everything correctly and you have the proper case, because Java's very case sensitive. It's like the password on your email account. If you type the wrong case in there, it's not going to accept it. So that's just an overview of this very, very basic program that we've been examining over and over again. We'll have a few more quick lessons giving you kind of an overview of the Eclipse editor, a little bit more detail, and then we'll start diving into step-by-step lessons and examples that you should be working on your own, and then looking at my video solutions for those. And then over time, you're going to find that your skills are going to naturally progress. You won't have to memorize anything because you'll be practicing along the way with me.